Okay, exciting stuff. All right, so basically, this is a Neo Media conference, so I'd be really surprised if the folks here didn't know what new media is, but in case you don't, this term sort of describes works of art that are usually created and distributed and usually received as well digitally, so basically online art or online works of some kind. And media has always been participatory to some degree, going back to mythology and folklore from centuries past. But new media kind of has expanded the ways in which stories and storytelling can be participatory on the part of the audience. So audiences aren't simply welcome to co-create the art they consume, they are expected to co-create it, often in the case of these digital medias. We're living in a very intensely transformative media ecosystem, in other words. We're basically, our approach for this project is that we wanted it to be sort of a smorgasbord of different theoretical approaches you can use to kind of think about and deconstruct new media. And we're using DreamSMP as our case study. We had a far expanded case study originally. We were looking at other storytelling projects that involve video game mechanics. Blaseball was a big one. For the sake of time and for simplicity's sake, we've cut that out. So we're just going to be talking about a small fraction of our case study today. That's the DreamSMP stuff. But if you're interested in the Blaseball stuff, you're always welcome to ask for our full bibliography at the end of the presentation. So our main research questions were, how can these stories, which are temporal, so very heavily reliant on being at a specific time and available at a specific time, multimedia, and usually very reliant on that participatory culture, how can they be coldly and clearly understood by storytelling scholars? And what can these new media sagas teach us about the relationship between that creative labor, the technology that it's being told using, and storytelling as a social phenomena and a collaborative practice? So we're combining three distinct sort of theoretical approaches today. The first one is sports theater entertainment. The second one is ergodic storytelling. And the third is something called forensic fan practice, sometimes called forensic fandom. And we're going to be applying these to a case study of DreamSMP. Quick disclaimer, pretty much everything we're saying about this during this presentation applies to a lot of other machinima roleplay, a lot of other SMPs. But DreamSMP is the one we focused on because it's basically the one that is the most well preserved that we could find. It's very well archived, and archiving digital media is notoriously a nightmare. So that's kind of why we chose to focus on it.
So what is the DreamSMP is a great question for if you don't really know. Specifically, the DreamSMP is a multiplayer Minecraft server. SMP stands for Survival Multiplayer. And it is an invite-only server with a group of big friends that are telling a story in DreamSMP. So it really started as a group of about 8 friends who were really just trying to fight the boredom of the early pandemic. And so they played Minecraft together. And so for these first early streams, there was no story, there was nothing. It was really just them playing Minecraft. As kind of time went on and more people got added, 2 of the main ones that kind of, I guess, are well known as influencing this idea of the story is Tommy Innit and Wilbur Soot. And the 2 of them, and all of them, kind of started to do what I call an advanced form of committing to the bit, where they're really just kind of messing around and role-playing kind of caricatures of themselves in the story. And this started in about, I think, April, and by fall of 2020, it was a fully story with improv. Kind of think of it as a TTRPG where the DM has all of the little plot points that they kind of want to hit and steer people toward, and the players improv it. But all of the players know what plot points they want to hit, and they all kind of improv towards those plot points. So these are some pictures of the server just to kind of get an idea of this was actually, all of these were built by people in the server and different things.
And if that description sounds kind of familiar to you, it's because that this kind of both immersive and interactive forms of collaborative storytelling have been taking place in more traditional offline theater spaces for decades already. Do you want to hit immersive theater?
Yeah, so immersive and interactive theater. Immersive theater is kind of where the boundaries of the stage are removed and the audience is now in the same space as the actors. And interactive theater is where that final boundary is removed, where sometimes the audience members will be pulled into the story. So one of the things that we found in our research is a production of Sleep No More, which is it's a Macbeth retelling. And it's set in a building. So it's a 6-story building that the production company retrofitted into a hotel. And audience members go in, they get a mask, and they wander the hotel, and they can go anywhere they want. There is story happening all over with all the actors. And as an audience member, you can kind of just walk into a room and watch something happen, and then walk into another room. You can rifle through drawers to find clues about the story. And sometimes the actors will pull people in for what common goers to this call a one-on-one, where the actors will give them something or say a line specifically to this audience member.
Yeah, and what we've found in our work with like interactive and immersive theater in regards to like digital storytelling projects is that Dream SMP and a lot of these other SMPs combine elements of both immersive and interactive theater. So for example, like the ways in which like people can like be involved in the chat and sometimes like influence the story to some degree is basically interactive theater, but it's still not wholly immersive because there is like a boundary between the audience and the player or the creator.
I did forget to mention it is streamed on Twitch live most of the time.
So our first like kind of theoretical approach we're going to be talking about today is a theoretical approach that was actually developed specifically to talk about the way that fiction and reality tends to blur in professional wrestling. So this might be terrible news to some of you, but Minecraft roleplay is the professional wrestling of esports, is what we've discovered. Yeah, I know, it's bad news. I'm sorry to break it to you. So sports theater entertainment kind of describes this quasi-fictional type of ongoing storytelling project wherein wrestlers are performing characters and following storylines and enacting these moral narratives, while the audience is also performing their part as either like endorsing or disavowing what is being shown to them in the story, kind of like a Twitch chat. So yeah, basically we found that there was a lot of like, interestingly, a lot of overlap between these kind of serial ongoing stories that are being televised using like Twitch and YouTube, and other kinds of like ongoing sports narratives. Specifically the way in which like players' real skill set informs the fictional story is like a really, really big part of like why this form of digital media is so interesting. So we have some examples.
So Dream SMP as a form of sports theater, like Mike Arthur was saying, it's a lot of how the players can play influences the story, where the streamer Dream Was Taken is a speedrunner, and so his skill set is highly specialized, and his character becomes this kind of like terrifying villain in the story because he can do these things. And Technoblade is another one who is a PvP specialist, and he's specifically brought into the story as a PvP person, and because he is needed in one of the fictional like wars. So a lot like players learn, their characters learn new skills as the player might learn new skills. And similar to, well, I guess opposite of how in movies a stunt person can kind of take over for an actor, these are live and they are in the constraints of Minecraft. So they have to know how to play Minecraft because the constraints of Minecraft are widespread as far as like telling a story. And so if they need to perform this feat, they have to be able to do it live and be able to do it themselves. So it's kind of like the pro wrestling and stuff.
Yeah, basically our like big point of interest with this theoretical approach is that there is nothing a character can do that the player can't do. The character and the player's skill sets are synonymous with one another.
And some of how the fan interaction fuels it. So there have been moments where a character has this thing about them that was fan made. So one of the streamers, Quackity, they have like a 3 life system, and when his character died, the dialogue influenced how the fans interacted with his character and drew his character. And one of the ways was drawing a scar over his eye. You can't really see it, but this is a later version of his character, and he added that in because he liked the way the fan art looked. Another streamer, George Not Found, fell asleep in real life while it wasn't while it, but he slept through an event. And fan theory kind of expanded upon that and said that his character is asleep. And it kind of influenced this idea that now his character, and this is stuff he has done now, added to it, his character makes it difficult to differentiate between reality and when he is asleep. And this is a real picture of one of the areas. You can't really see it, but this is some of the fan art that has been made of some of that same area.
So our second theoretical approach that we kind of wanted to play with was ergodic storytelling, which is basically a term that just means choose your own adventure. It refers to any kind of story that is navigated by processes of choice. So the reader or the viewer or the player is forced to make decisions that they cannot take back. And some of you might be familiar with this kind of format from like ARGs or hypertext fiction. So for example, like something that is kind of like you see with a lot of machinima roleplay and a lot of like these SMPs is that each player is a point of view character. So if you're watching a particular plot event live, you have to choose which character's point of view you're going to watch it from, and that's not a choice that you can ever really take back. You can always go back and watch VODs or like recordings of the stream from other players' perspectives, but you're never going to be able to recreate that experience live. And so there are these choices that are kind of foisted upon the audience member. So it doesn't really determine the outcome of character or story arcs, but it does sort of influence the direction of them. And also it means that the genre of the story changes depending on the perspective of the character you decided to choose to watch that event through. So that choice is not really one choice, it's kind of three, because when you decide on what perspective you want to watch, you're also deciding what genre of fiction you're going to be watching and what style that story is going to be told in. And this is, oh yeah. And then there are also a couple of like instances where like funnily enough, the choose your own adventure system kind of robs the audience of choice, because like I said, there are choices you make, and for every choice you make, there are 5 choices that you avoided and that you cannot really go back and choose to experience. One of the kind of like the most interesting ones is that, I'm gathering my thoughts here. The temporal aspect is really important when you're talking about anything that is being told serially. So like something that we've kind of talked about is how a hiatus period can't really be replicated if you decide to go back and binge a whole bunch of recorded streams. You're never going to be able to experience the wait period between installments of the story. And experiencing that wait period actually has a demonstrable influence on how readers or audience members understand and make sense of the story. So if you talk to someone who was actually there and watching live and had to wait through a hiatus, they're probably going to have a very different opinion on what happened versus someone who went back and was able to kind of binge watch all these streams in quick succession. Yeah. And our third kind of approach to this is forensic fan practice. So forensic fan practice involves audience members basically having to piece together a story from disparate bits of information that have been scattered across the web. Like, I'm trying to think of an example of this. But I mean, these kinds of storytelling projects are very common in ARGs and hypertext fiction. Basically, the audience member has to play a detective role, and there's a lot of labor involved in consuming this story because they have to put it together from disparate pieces. And what we found when we were looking at machinima roleplay and various SMPs is that this term kind of has limits because these SMPs are taking it a little bit further than that.
It's kind of where forensic fandom is, where we are piecing together bits of stuff that the creators have put out there. Archaeological fandom is where we as the fans are piecing together bits of story that might not exist anymore. Because of this early, you can see like the early canon where they were just friends playing Minecraft. There's a lot of questions of if that is actually truly canon to the story. And on the flip side, like what happens to the later story if the early story isn't canon? A lot of this early stuff isn't recorded because they weren't really paying, they didn't know what was going to become of it. And there's massive amounts of like fan recordings and stuff where this stuff a lot of this stuff is gone. The VODs are gone. Twitch keeps it up for only 2 months, and then it's never really kept.
So at this point in the presentation, you might kind of be thinking like, why does any of this matter? Why does it matter how much labor is involved in co-creating a story that you are also consuming? And the answer is because these kind of more rhizomatic, more chaotic serial structures of like various digital storytelling projects are being co-opted by like major media corporations in ways that are both interesting and kind of alarming. Some of you may have heard of Forefront, which is a company that has launched its own fictional cinematic universe on TikTok, where they're basically paying actors to pretend to be fake influencers who pretend to be a fake friend group that are telling a fictional story. So it's like if someone created, there's no gaming involved, but it's like if someone created an SMP, but everyone involved, even the creators, like the content creators, were paid actors. And this is really interesting because it's kind of an example, like a very prominent example of a corporation trying to kind of mimic this this ergodic, right? This choose your own adventure story in which typically the audience participation rate would be very high. And so like the labor that people put into co-creating that story pays off in that they are able to influence the direction of the story. But like instead they're trying to mimic that system while like preserving a very sort of hegemonic structure of storytelling, where you've basically got like a board of executives in a room who already know how the story is going to go. So like basically what we've found so far, I didn't want to title this slide conclusions because this is an ongoing research project, full disclosure, so we're still kind of like looking at our observations. But so far what we found is that there's a lot of like these types of ongoing serial narratives that are very collective and rely on something called prosumption, which is that again, that combined act of both like consuming and producing the same piece of media on the part of the audience. These storytelling projects allow for a lot of diversity of structure, diversity of style, of format and narrative. You can kind of do things with them that you wouldn't be able to do with like a TV show or like a published book or something. And when like these corporations try to mimic that structure without really preserving like I guess the intensity of like that fan prosumption, a lot of that diversity is lost. So it's just kind of it's something to be aware of. I think it's important that as digital storytelling becomes increasingly participatory and increasingly navigable by choice in these 3 ways we've talked about, it's a good idea for audiences to not just consume media critically, but to co-create media critically. Yeah, that's what we have for you today. If you'd like our bibliography, or if you want to know about our extended case study where we talk about things other than Dream SMP, let us know.
We have 5 or 6 minutes for questions. So
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Yeah, Blaseball. It's called Baseball at Your Mercy. And it's a video game in a very loose sense of the phrase. It's basically like explaining baseball is very difficult. It's like
horror game.
It's a surreal baseball simulator where like there is no real video game. Like you don't go in and play a game. You observe simulated games of baseball and you watch them on the baseball website. Then you receive like an in-game currency that lets you, if you like get together with other players, you can combine your in-game currency to then decide how to change the rules of baseball. So that is the main one, but we also want to look at different SMPs and other kinds of like machinima roleplay. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
How does baseball differ from, I think you mentioned a lot about how like the characters and the players from where baseball is
that's a great question. So they're incredibly different pieces of media. One is basically like loosely scripted improv theater. And then the other is a baseball simulator. So interestingly enough, like the character, like baseball players in baseball are like, they're not real people and they're not acted by real people, but the game devs are kind of playing a character in that they are playing like deities, like umpire deities who then kind of interact with the audience and like give you lore and stuff.
I think I know that.
Okay, I can I'll try to write that down and see if I can look into it because we're always looking for more kind of items. Right there.
See if these what?
Okay, I've never heard of that, but that sounds right up our alley. So I'm going to look that up. Maybe come talk to me later about that. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, I think we do.
Okay, anyone else? All right, well, it's Morbin time. Thank you guys.